Our next speaker is Dr. Sohyun Park, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Plant Science and Landscape Architecture at the University of Connecticut. She earned a PhD degree in environmental design and planning from Arizona State University, a master's in landscape architecture, and a BS in biology in Korea. Dr. Park is also a certified site accredited professional. Her scholarship focuses on the dynamic interplay of natural and human systems, including impacts on sustainability, resilience, and ecological and community health. Dr. Park's scholarly goals are to produce knowledge of how ecosystem services respond to urban morphology, functions, and changes, as well as how they interact with human well-being. At UConn, she teaches planting design, community planning, and sustainable environmental planning and landscape design. Her teaching program emphasizes experiential learning, community engagement, and life transformative education. Dr. Park is a recipient of the 2021 DELA's Faculty Award on Service Learning and the UConn Provost Emerging Faculty Award for Excellence in Community Engaged Scholarship. Today, she will be speaking on forging intimate connections, trees, people, place, and spiritual well-being.
Okay. Sound okay? All right, good afternoon, everyone. Very happy to be here. Nice to meet you all in person and also virtually. I'd like to thank to Dr. Catherine Moore for the invitation and nice introduction as well. Also, I'd like to thank to the Global Affairs for hosting this event, and thank you for everybody who are joining this talk in person and also virtually. I'm sure you have heard a lot of different perspectives around the topic of the tree of life. And my perspectives might be a little bit different from other talks from yesterday and from this morning. I'm landscape architect, so we are working to create a spaces or manage the spaces, mostly in the built environment, sometimes in natural environment as well. But I think the landscape architecture is a discipline where we are care deeply about the relationships between people and the environment. And so when I was asked to speak at this conference about the tree of life, I thought that's very interesting, very exciting. We use trees a lot as a design element and also materials. But the concept of tree of life was a little bit, different. So I think it was a really great opportunity for us to think about, what that means to individuals. And so I'm just appreciative of the opportunity. Let's see if it works. Right. So I just start my talk with these photos. Was that the other day that my girl and I were on the Purgatory Caves Trail in Massachusetts. Beautiful area. And my girl, 13 years old, tree loving girl, were really happy on the trails and just hugging each strand of trees. And while we are on the way, we found the picture on the center, in the center part over here. All those roots were somehow exposed on the bare soils. And I said, oh, doesn't it look like, human blood vessels? And she said, yeah, it looks like it. And she said, I sometimes thinking that, maybe all those animals are protein and humans are viruses, and microorganisms under the soil are hormones because they regulate the functions of the body. And all those trees may be the blood vessels that can actually happen in the human body. So I thought that's very interesting. And so we just kept talking about the metaphor between the plant bodies and also human bodies, and the interconnections between them. So I thought that's can I just include that slide with you? So she said, okay. So I just included that picture over here. But I just try to see, the concept of tree of life from the landscape architecture perspectives, because like I said, we use trees a lot, and also plants in general, in different frames. So one at the spatial frame, and also using the temporal frame, meaning that you can actually see the trees, individual trees at the plot level or the very small scale level, all the way to the block levels and city block levels or landscape levels. And also you have a temporal scale where you can see trees that could be managed immediately, and also can see the whole life cycles of the trees. And oftentimes the life cycle is really longer than that of the human scale. And so thank you. So the trees are seen as a design element because we, as a landscape architect, are actually modeling and also shaping the built and natural environment. We are the half science, half art field, and basically we are actually building the form. And trees are really integral in terms of the elements of designing any spaces, and also really essential materials for human experiences. So and if you see any trees in the design spaces, I'm not talking about the trees that you can see in the national parks or maybe reserved areas or national forests. But even in the context of the urban and suburban settings, you can see all different kinds of trees, right, in the design spaces. So as a designer, we are really caring about the aesthetics, the beauty of the trees, because they can increase the visual quality and also spatial perspectives, because trees can function as a construction materials, and also ecological perspectives. So trees can solve a lot of environmental problems. As you see, the trees in the streetscape, and also some contaminated soil, that trees have certain kinds of performances that can really help with the environment, where oftentimes human coexist. So a little bit of the evidences in terms of the trees in the design spaces for the benefit of the environment. A big tree consumes and transforms CO2 from the air in an amount equivalent to that found within the space of 800 single-family houses. Native grasses or ground covers planted on the banks of the expressway reduce traffic noise. And also 2-foot thick cypress had reduced noise by 4 decibels. And plant reduce sound of a higher wavelength, which are very offensive to the human ear. Leaves and branches and roots and the litter of the plant deter the soil erosion into waterways and reduce pollution. So there's a lot of functions that plants provide. So that's part of the research area that I do, in terms of urban ecosystem services, and trees are really kind of central in terms of all those performances that landscape provide at any scales. But the essential relationships between trees to place and trees to people and trees to other trees or other plants are also very important considerations for us. And because we, basically try to shape the environment where all living things can thrive, right? And so it's really important to choose the tree species in the right place, right? To have a really symbiotic relationships between the trees and humans. And so those three aspects, trees to place, trees to people, and trees to other plants are key relationships that we see. And usually when it comes to good landscape design, we see really harmonious interactions and balance among those three components. For example, you might see certain, plants that are paired well with the other companions. So wild ginger might, better team up with the cornflower or pond flowers, which can be found in wildflower meadows, and trillium spores can be found underneath the oak trees. But sometimes you see the imbalance between those things, so that traditional residential landscape, particularly with the residential landscaping, you care too much about the aesthetics. So you see the manicured landscapes, but then you don't see many diversity. It's just turf, super look good and needy, tidy, but you don't see much life in there, right? On the other hand, maybe if you see the landscape like the picture on the right hand side, you might think that it's really ugly area where you see a lot of weedy plants, and what's the value of that space, right? You want to avoid that area. But in fact, there might be a lot of, that biodiversity and a lot of life interacting with each other, maybe on the ground, below ground, and above the ground, right? So ecologists call them as a novel ecosystem, so that it doesn't look like a real ecosystem, but there's a life and interaction that's taking place over there. It's really important to understand the interrelationship between those three factors that I mentioned before. And so, because I'm working a lot with my students and not my community members in Connecticut and beyond, I have been working with more than 16 different communities, towns and cities and regions, and etc. Clients are really diverse. They can be individual, they can be community, they can be government officers, at very different in terms of context and spatial scales. Sometimes we work with historically underserved communities. We have a Harvard and New Havens and other communities that need some kind of help in design. So this particular rendering was done by one of my students who has recently completed for the design for the Harvard Land Bank, which is kind of pseudo nonprofit organization. They actually getting the vacant land from the town and rehab those areas. So most of the areas are vacant and very underutilized and very not good in terms of condition, very contaminated soil. And so land banks basically obtain those land and rehab and sell that property to prospective homeowners in those historically underserved areas. And so this was done on one of those streets in north part of the Harvard, which has a lot of African American communities. And so that's a really nice experience for us to actually giving some kind of a service learning experiences. And also it's actually being implemented right now. And then we are searching for the local developer who can actually do that things for us. But then there's other benefits they can think about in terms of the trees, particularly on the road. Then it will be really good for the pedestrian and also drivers as well, because you immediately reduce your speed when you have trees and canopies on the road. And trees can also reduce the stress level and decrease of feeling of fear and anger and aggression and things like that. Having said that, I don't know if you ever heard about the therapeutic gardens, where you can feel a little bit kind of palliative and limited restorative benefits from the trees and vegetations, not only from the aesthetic aspect of the trees, but also all senses they can see, like visual, acoustic, and touch and everything. And so, care for plant life to preserve the beauty and recreation diversity, help to more out awareness and also work up noxious consequences of our civilization. This picture is for the High Line in New York, and it was really, isolated urban district where you have a, increased connectivity using those elevated park area with a lot of plants that's up there. But also trees can also contribute to sense of a place. So, this is the scene from the Stone King Museum in New York. And in here, you can see kind of sculpturistic kind of aspect of the trees and bushes. And so it just gives some kind of sense of identity. And once you got there and see these landscapes, next time you go, I mean, you immediately know that's there, because of those characteristics. There was the engineering aspect of the trees. This is the landscapes on one part of the UTEP, University of Texas at El Paso. The landscape you see over here may look like very natural, but everything is really designed and implemented. So they literally brought all those, stones and gravels and everything to there to mimic the natural landscapes. There's aerial systems nearby, so they wanted to connect those aerial systems in the background of their campuses into the center of the campus as well. So now from the really barren areas, now they transformed from the barren space into like this native landscapes where a lot of community members actually are interacted into the institutional landscapes as well. This is the kind of preliminary design of the Freshfield Park that's still ongoing in Staten Island in New York. And basically it was a dump site where you see a lot of garbages accumulated over time. It actually closed collecting the garbages, years ago, but they wanted to transform this area into arguably the largest park spaces in New York. And there are a lot of trees and wildlife and native species who are actually incorporated into this system. And we'll see those engineering, performances of those areas as well. And switching the gears a little bit, just thinking about the tree of life concept, and I just thought about the tree humanities. I'm hiker. I just hike a lot, and whenever I'm on the wood, I think those thoughts, maybe the kind of innate feelings that you can feel with the trees and things like that, it's always in the back of my mind, but it was not really articulated at all times. But this is a really great opportunity that you can think about, right? And what's the meaning of the relationship between the humans and trees, and what strategies that we have to try to traverse the divide between the humanities and natural sciences, which more holistic understandings of the plant and human relations. And I just looked at my table, and there are a lot of books, and one of the books that popped my mind, and one of the books that you see over here, Tree Senses, it's published recently. I think it was in 2021, and it's basically a compilation of different cultures and different ways that we as persons perceive the trees. And oftentimes the culture has something to do with the way that people see the trees and interact with the trees. And then it has a lot of cultural aspect in it. And then one chapter talks about, Maui culture and how they preserve and interact with the trees in their countries. And so they wanted to have more trees and patches and clusters and sanctuaries and corridors, and things like that, and how they have, social and emotional engagement, and also the roles of trees in cultural and spiritual practices. In my home country, for example, in Korea, we had a lot of, uh, you know, sacred trees that have cultural and religious significance as well. And so pine trees are highly, highly respected in Korea for their longevity and resilience. And so it has something to do with the, Confucian values. So those trees are planted at important sites such as temples. Um, Jinko as well. So Jinko has some symbols for hope and resilience. And so in oftentimes the Jinko trees are planted on the universities or schools because they, have some kind of symbols like a knowledge and education and things like that. But sometimes, you see the over maintenance or lack of empathy with the fellow living organisms like trees, how trees are integrated in people's lives. Sometimes it's too much, sometimes too less. And so this picture was actually taken last week summer when I went there in my aunt's house, and it was apart complex, and I saw this, and I don't know, there's no relationship with whatsoever. I mean, it's just there, just amputated with all these branches and everything. So just give us some kind of implication, how we have to deal with in terms of the interactions with the trees nearby. And human well-being, right? So connect with trees can improve the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health and well-being. There are numerous research out there to talk about the benefit of trees in terms of the human health and well-being. Particularly spiritual well-being is defined as a high level of faith, hope, and commitment. Living in a world where we have a lot of challenges and crises like climate change and biodiversity loss. Some scholars say we are living in a world where a lot of omni crisis present right now, and young students are literally having some kind of a climate anxiety and fear and things like that. Trees can help partly, if not entirely, to give them some kind of faith and hope. So that's why we are really working hard to have some kind of exposure to those nature and green spaces. So there are some initiatives going on at UConn as well. Here we have a engagement here. We are developing a nature arts program, which is basically engage more college students to outside, hopefully with a lot of tree species for their mental health issues and things like that. This one over here, some of you might be familiar with this article that my colleagues and I have published recently in Nature Scientific Reports journal, and we were basically investigating how social media data can reveal new pattern in terms of parks and green spaces. And we actually compared the Twitter data before and after the COVID-19 pandemic, and realized that that people start posting their social media using a lot of words like God or nature or thanking or appreciating the nature and things like that. It might be really, straightforward and very common sense point, but if you see the previous years, you don't see any keywords like that before the pandemic. So we thought that's a little, interesting fact that people start, be appreciating the nature, and they were hunger for interaction. Maybe in the solitude setting that they can look into the inner mind of their thinking and everything. And it was really interesting to see that. And the other aspect of that particular study was that people really wanted to have passive recreational experiences and also natural element in the public parks, which is a little bit different from, if you just look at the park history, there's some kind of evolution that, Olmsted Design Park is a really pastoral parks that you see a lot of, big meadows, big, lawn spaces. And then you have, all those ballparks and playground for the youth. And then now people wanted to go back to more, green areas with more micro ecosystem and habitat that's actually situated in the public setting as well. And so, maybe it's a time that we can think about, what would be the model for the 21st century public spaces, including parks. And emotional and spiritual interaction, again, you can actually see the keywords related with the spiritual feelings in social media, which pops up really significantly after March 2020. So that was another indication that people are changing their mind. So from 2022 and this year as well, I try to incorporate the notion of mindfulness into my courses. It's kind of experimental kind of practices that I have never done before, but I try to have them go outside, forget about the schoolwork, and just immerse yourself into the nature, and then give me 5 sentences or 5 lines of your feeling. And it's really incredible that they actually return with a really refreshed mind. And also, the outcomes and productivity really going up after that kind of a short mini practices. So that this one over here is another experiment that I did last year, also this year, as part of the planting design class. And so I just put them in the Yukon Herbarium, thanks to Professor Cindy Jones and also Sarah Taylor. And so they were drawing, native wildflowers in the really quiet room. And here are some of those examples of those sketches of the plants. And they really, really concentrate on different parts of the body. I mean, the plants, so the roots and leaves and branches and twigs and flowers, fruits, right? And so it's very easy for you to just pass by if you see those things, particularly if you are driving, not walking. But in this particular setting, you see really specific parts of the plant body, and they actually came to me that it was a really peaceful moment that they can actually relax while they are doing this kind of exercises. So I just wanted to integrate, maybe part of those feeling that we can see outside into the indoor setting as well. But I also wanted to highlight, trees not as an object for design or interaction, but as a kind of companion, right? As a kind of fellow living organism, like I said, because they are social beings like us, right? So here are the picture that yellow eucalyptus and also oak trees are relying to each other. And so I don't know, maybe if one falls, maybe the other may be helping, right? And so they're actually interacting with each other and kind of in their interdependent as of now, right? And maybe controversial, but we say a lot about artificial intelligence these days. But there's argument about the plant intelligence and also animal intelligence, like we have a human intelligence, right? So tree root system, as a rule of thumb, are as extensive as their canopies, and they tap into the ground for life-giving moisture and nutrient. And it's really important to remember the massive microbial and invertebrate biomass that coexist with the roots and contribute to the carbon and nitrogen economy. But together, I mean, even though that's not very visible, people, I mean, like people, they know how to interact and how to help with each other in a giant living fabric, so that they can actually endure the external forces like storms and other disturbances or erosions, right? Um, so having said that, you know, trees and resilience, um, connecting with trees can improve our physical, mental, and spiritual health and well-being, like I said. And then, you know, I think resilience is a key term in these days, uh, and how we can make ourselves resilient into just against to a lot of challenges that we have, including climate change and all different kinds of disasters, right? And based on Tony His, who wrote the book titled Rescuing the Planet, he said that there is a you know one of the most resilient landscapes in Alabama, and the reason that he said that that is most resilient was that there are all different kinds of plants and animals and microorganisms, and the habitat and the landscape types are very, very diverse. And so even though you have strong storms or drought or whatever, right? You still can find some relatively cool microclimate in a drought season, or warm microclimate spaces uh, in the harsh weather conditions, so that it just overall makes a healthy ecosystems. So I thought maybe there's some kind of parallels in the human systems as well, right? So diversity is really key. We talked a lot about the DEI, diversity, inclusion, and justice issues, and like we, care about the diversity in terms of race and education and background and everything. Diverse systems are really make the system healthier. And so with a healthier ecosystem and healthier neighborhood, we can make a healthier earth. So the other aspect that I was looking into was the relationship between the trees and justice. I mean, there are a lot of neighborhood with higher level of tree canopies versus lack of a tree canopy, and there's a contrast. Sometimes you can see those two neighbors just side by side. And this one example, again, one of those two sites that we were working with for the Harbor Land Bank project, and this is one of them. And this is actually the backyard of one property, and it's very, you know, um, not really favorable conditions to be for now. And if you looking at the soil mass, there's a lot of high level of lead and also organic, which in certain point, it's just 10 times, higher than the threshold that the state social soil scientists recommended. So we had a lot of site survey and work with the communities and develop a series of renderings to transform those areas. There might be climate resilient and also biodiverse, and also make this entire neighborhood healthier. So some of those plan design examples and planting plan and schedules that we just presented to the client, and they are very happy about it. But if you just see the urban tree canopy priority maps, the Clay Ardener district that you see numbered as number 1, that's the high priority areas where the city recognized more tree planting, but that's also area where you see a lot of Harvard land bank properties are available. So there are some kind of correlations between those two. So, and that story was actually featured a few days ago, and if you're interested in actually read that article as well. But there's some kind of a, knowledge we need a resilient people, and also spaces, and trees need a more spaces that they can thrive with the resiliency. And these are some of those examples from the design competition with the theme of the world without trees. And so you can think of any known areas like Central Park or Eiffel Tower without trees. I mean, it just kind of, just gives us some kind of ontological questions of the relationship between the trees and humans. And so, like my title indicates, how we can actually connect with the trees and all living things. It's really important to nurture the intimate connections within and between individuals and populations and communities and biosphere that can contain plants and trees, animals and microorganisms and vertebrates and everything, because everything is interrelated with each other, and then people are easily, forget about it or underestimated the importance of the connection. So I think it's a great time to think about those connections and how we can promote those connections more and more, and strong physical, political, and spiritual links between trees and placemaking, well-being, strength, and power, alongside the humility, steadfast, and wisdom, and patience, and sustainability and kindness to people and the planet are really important. I just, think about the humbleness a lot and empathy. That might be something that we need to recover in the relationships. These are some of the books that just inspired me right now, and also very recently. I hope that you can really take them for the summer this for this summer. But that's it. Thank you.
It's yeah.
Thank you so much for your talk. I have so many questions. And there's some of them are going to be so incredibly basic because I am not a landscape architect, but I am so interested in it. And I actually study landscape, like historical landscape. But gosh, where do I start? Okay. So when you are developing a landscape, do you start with the trees, or do you start with are those their sort of anchors to a space when you are designing a space?
Yes and no. And because we are basically dealing with all outdoor environment, anything outside the building envelope, sometimes green environment within the building as well. But if there are some existing trees, yes, you can start with the trees and just identify and inventorize which kind of species that there. If not, then you actually propose with a list of the species with different groups like tall trees and shrubs and vines, ground covers and all that. So it's part of the site analysis that you inventorize all those trees. But trees are really important material that we care really much about. And some of the students are actually majoring and minoring in horticulture and have some
kind of prior knowledge and skill set and experiences, because sometimes they are running the family-owned businesses like, nursery or, kind of, things like that. So yeah, they love trees, and sometimes we just have to think about the invasiveness and the nativeness, because we don't want to have invasive species just over dominate the areas. So yes, yeah, we sometimes start with the trees. If not, we definitely consider them in the design processes.
One question that I'll-
So the other thing, so I have two more questions and I'm just going to ask them and then I will be done and you can answer them in whatever order or not, whatever you like. So, yeah. So one of the things, I guess one is more of an observation, is I really like the drawing exercises that you were doing with your students. And I think there's something really powerful about that close looking and when you're in the landscape to be part of that. Like, I'm curious how you think about that toggling between the distant and the close-up view, how the experience of the landscape changes so dramatically if you're like leaning in to look at a leaf, look at a flower, look at, sort of the way that ground cover creeps. And then when you're looking back and getting these sort of broad swaths of like color or sense of light or so on. And I think, I think that's, as we move through the world, we forget to attend to that. So I love that you do these drawing exercises with your students, which I think really helps bring that to the fore. And then the other thing, so I guess that was more of a comment. But the other thing that I was wondering is like, we were just talking about like how kind of natural living materials can resist our attempts to shape them or kind of dictate what they do. And I wonder how that works as you're designing a landscape, like what kind of margins do you have so that like, okay, this is what we think is going to happen, but maybe this isn't going to happen, like maybe these plants are going to do something else, something that is not preconceived or dictated by us.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think we can design with plants as a material, but they are living things so that they have their own trajectory of life, and the performance might not go as expected. And so we have another landscape architect named Cannon, last name Cannon. And she is basically doing viral remediation so that certain species might filter the copper or lead and things like that. But sometimes it doesn't work as they anticipated. And there are a lot of external forces that can intervene in the processes. So I think it's really important to watch how they are interacting in a real time, and also respect the functions that plants are doing, because plants themselves are also interacting with the immediate environment, almost immediately and at the same time. And so adjusted management are really key rather than designing and okay, I'm done and I'm just go away, right? So that's kind of a norm that we have to care about the post-design performances of those plant species. And going back to your second question or comment, the drawing practices and also distance versus, intimate looking, that one, the drawing was partly motivated by my own personal experiences, because now I'm living in Thailand, just 15 minutes away from the campus. But before that, I was living in Mansfield. So I just walked to the campus. It's about 30 minutes long walking. And I start to see a lot of new stuff. New color, form, shape, texture, smell and everything. So it just fascinated me. All of this is something that I pass by every day for a year. Now I start to see them, so that you start to realize the beauty just nearby. So I think that's really important to have closeness to those things, and then you can discover what's new to you, right? So I hope that my student can also experience with that. You know, not actually in the living things, but also they can do both. They can draw the living flowers, but also, you know, flattened specimen have their own beauty as well, because you can see really detailed, you know, shapes of the plant. So, yeah.
Thank you very much for your talk. I really enjoyed it. I'm a grad student in the Ecology and Evolutionary Biology department, and so I was very passionate about the whole talk. I just have one question. You did mention that diversity is key, and I really like the part where you really explain how biodiversity is important and stuff. I just want to know, in your design and all of the work that you do, how do you ensure that you maintain biodiversity?
Thank you for the question. I think that's a really important question. And because landscape architecture is very, very interdisciplinary and very diverse. And we are generalists, not specialists, but we have our own special interest. So in my case, that's biodiversity. So whenever I'm teaching design courses, I try to incorporate biological sciences into them. And so biodiversity is, I personally think that really important issues that we have to recover and very time sensitive. And so I have them first inventorize what's there. You know, they could include the plants and animals and wildlife. I know there are some different kind of perceptions in terms of wildlife, because you don't want to have a bears in your backyard every morning, right? And there are some kind of there is some kind of fear that they don't want to encounter with certain groups of species, right? But they usually don't really love the small animals, right? And they just try to take a picture of them. Oh, what a cute animals right there. But my students are really love to know what's there, and then I ask them to have a little bit of research about their habitat requirement. So what's the requirement for them? So maybe just overall home range and what species that what plants they love or hate, or no, and their behavioral, you know, characteristics and things like that. So actually, this morning I submitted a proposal to funder to basically propose the urban biodiversity framework, where you can integrate biodiversity data into the governance issues, and also human perception issues and justice issues, because there are some kind of correlations between biodiversity pattern and socioeconomic status. So that if you see historically underserved communities, you don't have many quality habitat or wildlife that's present there. Well, maybe it's context driven or specific to specific site, but that's kind of generalized pattern that we see in the literature. So yeah, maybe selfish effort that I wanted to have the biodiversity conversation into the design realm, so that they can have a more literacy, biodiversity literacy. They know more about the species and their conditions to live. So it's basically the effort to coexist, because we are sharing our habitat with them, right?
Thank you very much. Thanks very much for your talk. It was really, really interesting. And it was, in some ways it was troubling, because I'm thinking of a longer historical moment not very much longer. I'm thinking going back to the 1950s. And the first thing I thought of was a brilliant film from 1958 by Jacques Tati called Mon Oncle, My Uncle, in which everything is, this is post-war, everything is modern. It takes place in the suburbs of Paris, but it's just at the border of Paris. The suburbs of Paris are, human, natural, falling apart and stuff. The interior of Paris, however, is highly modernized, highly technical. And the one sign of that modernity is confining nature as much as possible. So these people have this gorgeous house and stuff, geometric formations, but they're like, nature is given up the size of a postage stamp, right? That's it. So the character in the movie is trying to kind of straighten out these trees that go what it is. Yeah. And so he keeps clipping them. He keeps clipping them lower and lower and lower. And it's just this really funny kind of ironic thing about, like nature's just in the way, but then I was thinking also about one of the the figureheads of neoliberalism in the 1980s was governor of California. And that movement that Ronald Reagan put in was to get rid of the redwoods. We don't need we don't need sequoias. We need a parking lot. We need, and so there's this other anti kind of natural anti-tree sort of movement here that, and people were really upset and so on and so forth. But I guess I'm just thinking of the problem of trees and nature is that there's this kind of evolutionary, moment. And it's always, I think it's always contested in the first place. But it's also what you're talking about now, I think, is a very, very pertinent momentary issue, because I think people have decided, finally realized, the earth is just completely screwed up by what we've done. And we better do something about it. So there's this kind of, and I know students, for instance, are very, very much interested, very much ethically committed to this idea of renovating, nature and renovating the world and so on and so forth, but it's through the built environment. But at the same time, you have movements where there's no more public space. The space of discourse and the space of public gathering, the space of politics has been reduced. So the issue that when you show the High Line, I think it's really interesting that the High Line is just a zone, a strip. Everything around it is privatized. You can't stand there and talk. You can't make politics. So in other words, there's this amazing way in which I think there's this contradiction, I would say, between the promise of nature, the promise of trees, the promise of the environment, and the reality that politically, there's also an impossibility at the same time. And I just find that very worrying. That's all. So anyway, those are the things that are running through my head. This isn't a question. This is just my talking about it. Well, I think it's the way that the environment can be, the natural environment can be instrumentalized to serve these different functions, and so it can make some people feel really great. It can lead to an opening with, okay, we really got to do something finally at the last minute, which is all very, very positive. But there's also these other aspects to it. The images you showed of the gardens, for instance, the renderings, I couldn't help but think this looked like sales catalogs for, gardens. Here's what I want in my garden. Here's what I want my garden to look like. It looked very, white, urban, middle class. So, I don't know. I just think that there are things
that's coming up. I feel like that's touching on a question that came up in my mind, and one that I was struggling to articulate, but that landscape and trees, like, it feels like, I mean, when we discuss them, when we're discussing nature, we're discussing ways to instrumentalize nature, to use nature for the benefit of humanity instead of nature as nature, you know? And I mean, I feel like that's kind of what you were speaking to, that it's like used for particular purposes, whether it's, you know, like creating a confined sort of nature for enjoyment, or for, you know, to create a particular sense of beauty, to increase like value of something. But like, I wonder if there is this sort of a movement to preserve or address nature in a way that is not instrumentalized. Greg's like, no.
Hate to be bringing up Latour again and again, but it's like there is no nature. I mean, like we've always been shaping it. There was a paper out a few years ago, Nature magazine. I don't know. It's like 98% of the globe is shown since the dawn of man, like more or less traces of humanity. So there's always going to be a politics of nature, that there's no such thing as it actually. It's all just culture.
I don't have time's up, so I just try to be quick, but I think because this is a discussion, I think it's really great to have some kind of discussions like this, and that just proves that my talk is relevant to the total tree of life. I'm a little worried, but and resonate with some of you. But I agree. I mean, my fellow designers, who one of them really hate to use the nature because it's so vague. And then if we are ecologists, what is the reference state, right? For the restoration, for example, what time point that you want to go back, pre European settlement, or right? So what's wild, right? So I think that's an ongoing discussions. And I agree that we somehow instrumentalize nature in a way that we benefit from them. So same thing with the ecosystem services concept, right? That's basically services that ecosystem provide for the human. It's a very human-centric concept. And I think it's somehow rooted in the capitalism, colonialism, all different kinds of philosophy that actually rooted in that kind of conceptualization. But still, I think because we have 90-something% of ecosystem already lost, and species are being lost, extinct, right? And I know that's a little debatable, but we are actually living in a threshold where we might not really go back when we go beyond that point. So I think I have some kind of obligation that even though there might be trivial, we can do our part, and then mobilize people to go that direction. So I don't know if that answers to your question, but I'm happy to have a more conversation after the session. Thank you so much for those comments and questions.
Thank you very much.